Lesson 2 Habit Building. Building better habits. We're going to talk about how to be more consistent, how to get better with your goals, and how to make it so it is second nature. And the first thing I want to go over is this quote: long-term consistency needs short-term intensity. And this doesn't mean that short-term diets or programs are bad. Obviously, they don't. We have our shred program is a very short-term burst, but you have to think about what happens afterwards. You might make some short-term progress, but when the diet is over, then what happens? Because diets that work via suffering and restriction fail when people no longer want to suffer or be restricted. And that's proven again and again in research that 95%, up to 95% of people who lost 20 pounds through dieting failed to keep that weight off over a 3 to 5 year period. And that's almost always the case with short-term go hard or go home style diets. So obviously the best nutrition approach you can take is the one that you can stick to long term. That's why we have our 3 nutrition rules, because they are flexible and they can fit your preferences, your lifestyle, and your individual tastes. And another good part about the nutrition rules is you don't have to be perfect. You just have to get better over time by gradually building better nutritional habits. Now, there will always be blips because getting results isn't a linear process, but over time, building better habits wins for long-term success and for maintenance of fat loss or muscle gain. Remember, long-term consistency beats short-term intensity. So what is a habit? Well, a habit is a behavior that we put on autopilot, and they are a vital part of us getting results. Designing a habit. So let's go through the process of designing and implementing a new habit. First of all, a habit must be obvious. You have to easily understand how putting this habit into place will positively affect your goals. So studies have shown that the closer a habit links to your goals and your values, the more likely you are to follow through with it. And the more complicated or the harder it is for us to see the connection between the habit and our goals or our values, the less likely we are to feel in control of it, and the less likely we are to stick to it. So it's important to make it really simple and really obvious how the habit links to the goal that we are trying to achieve. So the first rule, it must be obvious. Second, the habit needs to be frequent enough that it can become subconscious. This means that your new habit must be done ideally every day, or at least almost daily, for this to happen. So trying to turn something like I'm going to start swimming once a month into a habit is unlikely to happen. For example, on our challenge or trial, people who trained with us twice a week, or at least twice a week, are more likely to sign up as full members and develop habit of coming to the gym at least twice a week for the remainder of their time with us. The habit must have a trigger. So by definition, habits are triggered by something in our environment. For example, you go into the bathroom in the morning, you see your toothbrush, and you brush your teeth. So seeing your toothbrush is the trigger. If you don't have a trigger, then you can't create a new habit. Now, a really easy way to create a trigger is to do what's called habit stacking. This means using an existing behavior or trigger to be the trigger for your new habit. So let's say that you want to stretch more. And also, let's say that you are already in a habit of having a coffee every morning when you get up from bed. So you could do something as simple as leaving a post-it note saying stretch next to your kettle or coffee machine, then stretch while the coffee boils. That way, you can start to build a habit of stretching each morning by piggybacking on a habit that you already do subconsciously, which is having your coffee. Think of it this way: any new habit that piggybacks an old one should be able to fit into this statement. Before or after, which is the current habit, I will, new habit. So this example would be, after I put on a coffee machine in the morning, I will stretch for 2 minutes. So that is your trigger. So it must be triggered, and you can do habit stacking. So you add a new habit before or after the current one. The fourth point, the habit has to be achievable. So if I were to ask you, how likely are you to stick to the habit you've set yourself, you'd be 9 or 10 out of 10 certain that you can achieve this habit on a daily basis. Because yes, you might feel fired up, and if you just joined, your motivation is definitely really high, but that's very rarely leads to long-term big changes, because then, the motivation will go a bit low. So we need to plan for how we can execute the habit, even if you don't feel like it. So when it comes to building new habits, it's very important that it has to be achievable. And that's why we start slow or start easy and make it progressively more challenging. And because it's actually more important to succeed at something really straightforward and simple than trying to be perfect straight away. So just remember that your behavior has to go into an autopilot. So think of things or behaviors that are achievable for you to amend or do. And try to make it easy enough that it's pretty much impossible to not follow through or fail. And the last point, it must be 100% under your control. This is really important. So, for example, if you set a habit that you need to get 8 hours sleep per night, that will not be 100% under your control, because there might be a car alarm going off on the street. Your child might have a rough night, so you might not be able to fall asleep. So that is not possible to have 8 hours every night. But what would be under your control in this scenario of sleep would be how is your sleep hygiene or your sleep routine. So instead of aiming to get 8 hours of sleep every night, you can aim to improve the sleep routine by not using your phone for 30 minutes before bed. So these 5 steps are steps that I would take for designing a new habit. So it must be obvious for your values and your logic. It must be frequent, it must be triggered, it must be achievable, and it must be 100% under your control. The last part is to write this up into your habit statement. And you should do this every time you want to implement a new habit. And the statement goes like, I am 90 to 100% certain that I will, that's where you put the action, when there is a trigger in order to achieve the outcome. So you've got the action, the new habit that you're going to implement. You've got the trigger, that's when you're going to do it. And you got the outcome, the reasons why you're doing this habit and what the goal will help you to achieve. So using our example from earlier, I am 90 to 100% certain that I will stretch when I put the coffee machine on in order to improve my flexibility. So that's how you go about designing and implementing a new habit. If you need any help with this, or you're not sure what habit to pick, speak to me. You have catch-ups with Greg available in your calendar, or one of the other coaches, and we'll all help you to pick one that will give you a good return on a small, simple behavioral change.